Women on a Green Mission. Follow along as two friends document their unfurling permaculture journeys.
Join our chats each week where we'll be sharing how we and others apply permaculture to our gardens and daily life.
We're no experts. We're at the start of our journey, fumbling our way to a greener life. We'd love your company along the way.
Hey.
Hello, how are you?
I'm well, thank you. How are you?
I am great. Feeling great.
Good.
Sun is out and it's good.
Yeah, so we just got smashed with a few days of rain, but the sun is out here too, so
everything's
enjoying
going
it.
Exploding.
Yeah. Well, hopefully. I tried to plant a whole heap of stuff right before the rain hit, thinking, it'll be good to get it all in. But I planted like my dahlias that had already pre-sprouted, so they're not just tubers, but I'm hoping they kind of enjoyed the rain and didn't get too smashed by it.
Too waterlogged,
Yeah, so we'll see. What have you been up to?
Just letting my garden grow wild. I keep telling myself that I'm doing it intentionally for the biodiversity of the garden, but that's a
stick to that story.
I just haven't gotten in there. It is so overgrown. There's I have several garden beds that I'm just like, oh my God, I need to get into. But when you've got all that to do, what do? You go away for a long weekend camping. So
make the most of that.
Oh, it was so needed. Like, it's just our little camping group, like a holiday group that we go away with. It's like, my best mate and her family and, other friends. And it's just, they're the sort of people that, enrich my soul. And I go away from being, quite re-energized. Those people that you can just be totally unapologetically yourself and don't have to watch P's and Q's or anything like that. Not that I generally do anyway, but yeah, it was just really good. And we only went, quite local. It was 40 minutes up the road to East Gresford, and it's a working property. They've got a campground on there, and they're very very eco conscious. I wouldn't say that it's necessarily fully green as such. Being a working property, a bit of an old school property, but they're very aware and. It was a really, really good weekend. Had a bit of wind, but didn't dampen anything. Got to swim in the river, and it just recharged us. Ooh. So what about you?
Lovely. Well, we decided to hire a bobcat for the weekend because it's fun. The long weekend. We get the Monday for free at our local place.
So nice.
We always try and make the most of a long weekend and hire it. So you pick it up on a Friday arvo and then you return it on a Tuesday. So we get the full 3 days for only the price of 2, which is very economical. So what did we do? We made 5 new orchard rows that will be espaliered. We finished off 2 big long rows at the back that we half finished last time but didn't quite do it properly because we ran out of time. So we finished those rows off. We mulched our existing orchard, our new orchard that we made, and the flower bed rows. We mulched all of the side hedges along the block. And leveled it out a little bit, which was really good. And then I got for free some raised garden beds from a friend down the road. Shout out to Elle from Shea Medicinal Herbs.
Superstar.
She's redesigning her garden and doing it more like a food foresty kind of setup. And so I wanted to get rid of her raised bed. So I got 7 of those birdies raised beds from Elle, which was amazing. So we put those in place, filled those up with soil, like some shitty clay soil, a bit of mulch, and then a nice topsoil. So we got a big truckload of topsoil in just to top dress all of the garden beds, mixed through some chicken manure. So we had like a massive weekend of gardening.
That's a huge weekend, yeah.
Yeah, and then the Monday we planted our figs, so I chopped them right back and put them in the ground. I was a bit worried it would be a bit late to get them in, but I consulted the Limestone alumni page, which is like my go-to for any gardening questions, and they were like, no, they're hardy, they'll be fine, go for it. So I just did it, and they bounced back beautifully, so they're all 3 of them are happy.
Awesome.
So yeah, we've got a fig espalier row because there'll be 3 plants in each of our espaliers for that section. So I've got one of just figs, and then I've started to underplant that. I went to the nursery to get some Charlie Carp and some sea salt, just because I don't really have anything here ready to go. So I just wanted to use that, get it in the ground, get it on their roots, give them a bit of a feed to Charlie Carp.
Charlie Carp's awesome, isn't it? Like, it's just I
hadn't heard of it until you mentioned it to me, and now I actually use it a fair bit.
Yeah, we use it all the time. And anyone who doesn't know, it's carp. Basically, it's fish emulsion, and it either comes in pellet form or liquid form. So basically, it's taking a pest and making it into a resource that you can use in the garden. Stinks to high heaven. Ant sprayed, hosed it on. Or actually watering canned it on and then gave a little hose in afterwards, all the roses and the garden beds in the house, and it wafts through the house, but it's a very temporary inconvenience, but it's great stuff.
It was great. I put like chicken manure at the bottom of them, and then fed it with Charlie Carp and a bit of sea salt, just because some of the roots got a bit damaged, so I wanted to kind of just make sure it was all good. But when I was at the hardware picking that up, I found some lemon verbena because I've been looking for it everywhere, and they had little tiny ones. So I got 2 of those and put those in our hedge. But then there was those big wheelbarrow tray things they have to move plants around. There were 2 of those full of plants that were just pretty much dead or very, very, very sad. And I said to the guy, "What are you doing with all these plants that are here?" He said, "Oh, I'm just going to chuck them out. We don't bother repotting them. Once they've gotten too big, we cut them back the first time and then we just kind of get rid of them." I said, "Oh, do you mind if I take some of them and try and revive them?" I said, "The worst that's going to happen is they die at my house instead of here." He's like, yeah, go for it. So I got a pumpkin, I got 2 nasturtiums, I got 4 daisies, I got 4 little native bush things that will totally come back, like leptosporums. I got those grassy things that was all brown, but there was still green growth. So I'm like, that'll be fine. I bought so much, I stole, took, revived,
rehomed,
so
rescued.
Oh my God, so many plants. And Oscar's like, "How much money did you spend at the nursery?" I was like, "I spent $10 on plants." And he's like, "Bullshit." And I was like, no, I promise. Here's the receipt. I kept the receipt to show him. Like, no, it's fine.
I need evidence.
And some of them were just daisies and things that, because we've got these new garden beds from Addie wants her patch. So I was like, "Oh, she can have the daisies and stuff." So I just potted them all up before the big rain came. So hopefully they're all happy after that rain. I haven't gone back out and checked on them yet because I had to jump on here and record this morning. But I'm going to go home and check all that out. So hopefully it's all happy and thriving.
That's so good. I love a good rescue. We do the same. If we're at a nursery or the big green shed and they've got the 50 cent or the 20 cent tray, right, what can we revive? Some of our best herbs that have thrived have been 20 cents and pretty much dead when we've put them in, and we're like, we'll just put you in, and if you want to grow, you go for it, and if not, whatever.
Especially just give them a real good haircut and chuck them in the ground. Sometimes they just dry from not being watered enough, or they're a bit root bound, and you kind of loosen it up and chuck it in. Yeah, they're happy. Well,
I love that you still got your fig in the ground, because talk about going and buying things that you didn't need to. I went and bought a heap of fruit trees, so stone fruit and apples and pears.
Yeah.
Right, we're at a time where we were super busy and I did not have time to get them in the ground, and I knew that I wasn't going to have time to get them in the ground, and I know better, so I've got 10 trees that I need to plant up and haven't been home to do it, and I've been busy with work, and they're actually starting to not just flower but set fruit. They're still bagged. They're bagged roots.
Wow.
So I'm going to chop them back, obviously. Anything that's bagged, when you put it in the ground before it goes in, you chop it back by 2/3. That's, you have to do that to give, send all that energy down into the roots, give it the best chance. But I'm looking at that going, how can you be loving being in this bag, in this spot? You get smashed by wind. I stick a hose in there occasionally, give them more water. But I'm like, okay, you know what? You're healthy. I've got to get you in, and whatever will be, because I'm not going to pot them up again next winter, to plant them out next winter. It's going to be a case of, I just don't have that time or the energy to be doing at that level. So I'm just going to get them in, and let's just see what happens.
Well, if they're thriving like that, surely they'll be fine in the garden.
I think they'll be okay. And we've actually decided with the orchard, because we were tossing up, you talk about espalier. We were tossing up, do we do espalier? Do we not? Blah, blah, blah. And then I decided, the first decision was, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to just let things grow quite large, and then I'll just net the bottom part, and that's our fruit, or I'll bag up fruit and that'll become our fruit. But I'm kind of doing that now. Well, I will be doing that, but I'm also then using a little bit of that tiny forest concept as well with mass planting and really close together planting. And I'm like, I'm actually going to create just like a little food forest just with fruit trees and then obviously guilds underneath. But I'm going to jam them in there. I'm doing a bit of an experiment. I'm just going to jam everything really close together. Because the ducks go through there, it gets enough water, it's getting enough nutrients, it's only improving more every time we dig a hole. We're seeing the improvement in the soil. So I'm like, well, let's just give it a go. And that way, it really aligns with my style of gardening, which is like just throw it and see what sticks. And also it allows that, we can still feed the birds, we can still get a harvest, it's providing shade for the ducks, it's improving the soil. And it's going to blossom en masse and look really pretty. So I'm like, it ticks all the boxes. I'm like, right, I found it. Ooh. It's so nice when you have that moment when you're like, do I do this? Do I do that? That person's doing that and that works really well. But. And then all of a sudden you kind of take all of these concepts and really find your own way through it. And it's like, yes, this is it. This is what I really want to do. So,
awesome.
That's fun.
Have to keep us updated on how it's going.
I will. I'm I'm stupid slack with being in the group and posting photos. Like, I know, like every start of the month, like every first of the month, you do the show us your garden. And maybe by the 10th, I've gotten around to it. I haven't even gotten around to it this month because I'm like, I can show you my weeds.
But there's beauty in that, in the imperfect gardens and letting the weeds go too. Like there's a season for everything.
There is. And another really cool observation we had, I don't know if I've shared this already, but we had a massive aphid load on the roses. Massive. Like it was getting to the point, and I was just like, do I spray? Do I not? I really don't want to. I just want to let them naturally be taken care of. Let the natural predators do their thing. But I was watching it and it's just like, and if anyone's ever seen aphids, if you've been out in the garden, they basically reproduce in front of your eyes. They are so prolific. They're crazy. Yeah. So I made the spray up, like the soap water spray, got out there, did 2 squirts and then went, I can see lacewings and I can see ladybugs and I can see like all these predatory insects. And I went, okay, no, don't spray. And I went, just trust the process, Joe. Just let nature do her thing. You've got the ecosystem in place now. Just let it happen. And you know what? If the roses get smashed, whatever, you can chop them back at the end of the season and they'll come back again next year. It doesn't matter. Come back from camping and got so excited. We've still got a few aphids, but it is so in balance. Like that huge burden has been taken care of. And the predatory insects that are around, the insects in general that are around, are amazing. Like it is just an absolute buzz in the garden. So I've just been out there like just watching and talking because that's what I do, talk to the insects. And it's just it's really nice to go, I have helped create this environment. I've done the thing that's allowed my garden to do what it needs to do to support all the beneficial insects and support the food insects as well. Like no one likes aphids, but they're the things that are feeding the beneficial insects that then have other benefits as well. So that was a really like we're starting to get to that stage now. So
so good. That's amazing.
Yeah, it was a win-win. So you go away camping and you come back and all these things just happen. Should go on holidays more.
Meant to be. Meant to be.
So who have we got this week? Who are we chatting to?
Yeah. So we've got an author this week. Her name is Manda Scott. So she's from over in the UK. And she's really interesting. Like
incredibly.
Her background, she's gone from one extreme to the other. She's had many, many lives. And written about all different things. this book that we talk about in relation to permaculture is a Thrutopian novel, which we talk a bit about what that is in the podcast. And it's, I always get them mixed up, fiction, non-fiction. It's a made-up story.
It's fiction. Yeah.
It's fiction. Thank you.
Yeah. There's fiction and then there's fact.
Fiction.
It's fiction. Yeah.
It's fiction. That's a better way to think about it. So it's a fiction novel, but it's based on some events that have actually happened around the world. And it reflects on our current state of the world and the future. It's about the environment, sustainability, people care, politics. It's a really interesting book, but it's told in a way because it is a story through the eyes of a grandmother and the relationship she has with her grandson and her extended family, which makes it engaging and just really interesting. And it really opened my eyes up to a lot of things, got me a bit more interested in politics. Yeah. How did you find it?
I found it really interesting. There was, I had a couple of times where I actually had to, because I was listening to the book and I had to stop because I'm sort of going, oh, my mind is like, it's like ding, ding, ding. I've kind of taken in, like, there's so much. Like, I described Manda Scott to my husband. I said, she's a next level thinker. Like, she's, there's the rest of us. And then there's Manda. Like, she just, the way, and you know, I'm sure our listeners will get that from the interview as well, the way her brain works and her capacity for learning and
her knowledge,
the way that she takes that knowledge and transforms that into a story. It's just like, wow, like for me, I had to take a step back a couple of times. Like, loved the story. It was really engaging. There's a lot that happens. Like, there's a couple of times I sort of like, hang on, where are we? What's happening? But because it's happening on so many different levels in the book, not giving it away. So go and listen to the book, but or read the book. But I really enjoyed the conversation. I had no idea what to expect, to be honest. Like, when, you know, you sort of first said, hey, we've got this author on, and I sort of went, oh, okay, like, that's sort of different to our usual guests. Like, this will be interesting. And I'm like, all right, let's listen to the book and see what this is about. And, you know, I sort of flip-flop between, yes, like, I can see how this relates to permaculture, and then had my little moments where I'm going, oh, I don't know, I think this might be, you know, sort of a stretch too far. And then it'd be like, no, I can see how it relates again. So, I found it a little bit challenging to kind of link it. And I think I was being a little bit too literal. After the interview, I sort of went, oh, okay, I can see, you know, how everything is connected, right? But it was challenging, but challenging in a good way. Yeah.
Yeah, and like you said, it's not what we normally touch on. It's very politically focused, especially once you get to kind of the midway part through the book and through this conversation. But yes, lots about ethics, about how we live, about choices we make, about the state of the world, about the system that we're living in and how to kind of, change that. So have a listen. I hope you like it. Very interesting, knowledgeable person. So
incredibly.
Enjoy. Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Practical Permaculture Podcast. This week, we've got Manda Scott, who is an author, joining us. Hello.
Hello, and thank you. It's such an honor to be here, and I'm really grateful you guys are putting yourselves out at weird time zones to make place for the fact that I'm in the UK and you're in Australia. So yes, thank you.
Our pleasure. So normally, because we have Australians on our podcast, we acknowledge the land that we're recording on, because that's something we do here in Australia. So I'm recording on Awabakal country. Where are you recording, Jo?
So I am on the lands of the Wanarua people here in the Hunter Valley in New South Wales.
And do you have anything like that over in the UK?
Yep, I'm probably on Siluran land. I mean, it's a little harder to know where the boundaries were, and I'm also not wholly convinced that tribal boundaries were as much of a thing in pre-Roman Britain. But if they were, this is Siluran land. It's the edge place between England and Wales. That.
Lovely. So we were both given your book to read, and that's why we're interviewing you today, to talk all about your book, because it's so wonderful.
Thank you.
So can you, firstly, for our listeners who don't know who you are, tell us a bit about yourself, your context, and where you live?
Thank you. Yes. So as we said, I live now on the borderlands between England and Wales. I grew up in
Mhm.
Scotland. I am a Scot at heart, and frankly, given the chance, I would be back there in a heartbeat. But my wife has two other generations of family around here, 5 grandkids, 3 children. So we're here. Um, and when I was in Scotland, I qualified as a veterinary surgeon, and I practiced for 10 years. I
Yeah.
specialized in neonatal equine intensive care, which is about as specialist as you can get. But at that time I was living in Newmarket in the east of the country, which is where all the horses are, the race horses. And at a certain point, I realized my spiritual practice has been shamanic since I was at college, and probably before, but I didn't have a label for it. And I was being nudged to do other things, and I started writing novels 30 years ago. And 20 years ago, I shifted from writing contemporary crime thrillers to writing historical novels based. The first ones were looking at the Boudican revolt, which is back in Silurian times. We were just talking about the tribes. And that was the point when our culture stopped being an initiation culture, a healthy indigenous culture, and was invaded by a trauma culture, the culture of Rome. And there was a 20-year insurrection. And Boudica is quite famous in the UK because she led the rebellion against Rome, allegedly. There's a lot of that that's wrong, but I wanted to look at who was here, who we were, and how we were before the Romans came. And so there are 4 books in the Boudica series. And then I went on to write a Rome series, which was essentially spies in Rome, because my publishers went, no more woo-woo stuff, because the Boudica books was all about the dreaming, the shamanic work, and they didn't handle it very well. They became cult novels, and I still have people who write to me pretty much every week going, oh my God, I just found your books and they changed my life.
Wow.
But publishers are essentially Romans, and they didn't handle it very well. And then, so that was it. It was historical novels until I had another shamanic nudge, and I ended up doing a master's in regenerative economics at Schumacher College in Devon, which economics was nowhere on my radar, not remotely on my radar until that point. But it was another life-changing event. And I really got to grips then with the depth and the breadth of the meta crisis. This was 2016-17. And that we have a lot of the answers. Regenerative farming, permaculture, changes in transport, changes in who we are and how we are. And I came home and started my own podcast because I thought, first of all, writing historical novels is not where it's at anymore. And writing is just very slow. So podcasts, this could be live if we wanted. I mean, it's not, but it could be, and it's not going to be obsolete by the time it goes out. Whereas a book, when I've got around to writing Any Human Power, I started it the summer solstice of 2021, and it came out at the end of May 2024. And to be fair to my amazing publishers, I was still tweaking it in March, which is very unusual, but it's still a very long, slow process. And then summer 2021, I ended up, we were doing shamanic work. I teach the shamanic work. I had been since the Boudica books. And I was teaching one of my really senior groups online because it was pandemic and we were all in lockdown and they were all around the world and they didn't want to have to go through 2 weeks quarantine either side just to turn up and do a masked ceremony. And I ended up having a series of visions, which ended up giving me the first scene and the three void walks in the book. We might get to talk about those, and the instruction of now you have to write this book. So I gave up trying to train to be a homeopath, which is what I was doing, and was back to being a novelist again. So that's the kind of as edited a highlight as I can get to.
That's a big journey.
Yeah, I love when I was listening to because I listened to your book, I didn't read it. And when I got to the end and you spoke about that, you spoke about all the influences on the book and the tweets at the beginning and all of and I just thought when I was reading it and thinking about it again, how much of you must be intertwined in that book and
Yes.
as part of Lan almost.
Yes, absolutely. Yes. She and Finn together are probably aspects of me that are most strongly, obviously, aspects of me. Because if I'm writing someone 2,000 years ago, yes, of course, every single character in every book has parts of the writer in them because you couldn't write plausible characters otherwise, but some are more strongly and more obviously. And yes, Lan absolutely has a lot of aspects of my life in her history.
Do you want to go into what the book is about a little bit?
Yes, I can. It's quite hard because you guys have read it. It's very hard to categorize. So we're calling it a Thrutopian thriller. And we're also, I started calling it a mytho-political thriller because I thought that's quite nice. It's another new genre, and also nobody knows what it means. But it gives me a chance to look at it. So the point, what I got when I was sitting up the hill, as instructed during the journey, was that I was very unhappy that we were not moving towards a future that we would be proud to leave behind to the generations that come after us. And why not? And what came in a big dump was that's because there are no stories taking people forward. And I thought, yeah, but podcast, books, all of these things, everything, it's all out there. And very obviously, yes, I can go down the rabbit hole of lots of nonfiction books because I have to, because I want to talk to the authors for the podcast. But normal people don't do that. And why am I getting all aerated if I haven't offered people a fictional view of how we get from exactly where we are through to a future that actually works? Because almost everybody, wherever we are on whatever political spectrum, has agreed that the current system is broken. What we disagree on is how we could fix it. And what I understood, having done by that point 3 years of the podcast, was there are so many ideas out there, but they're all being done by really hardworking, well-meaning individuals individually. And they're being done as isolated aspects in their little silos within the existing, very broken death cult of predatory capitalism. And nobody is breaking out of that. It's, permaculture. Beautiful and wonderful people are doing permaculture, but they're doing it with other permaculturalists, and it's not becoming this is the way things are done. And it seemed to me that's because we haven't got a story or a series of stories. We have a lot of stories. Every time you switch on the television, every time you read almost any book, radio, theatre, movies, poetry, blogs, newspapers, it's all, this is how humans are. Capitalism is human nature, and it's not. It's a particularly warped, traumatized version of human nature that lets the worst of us have ascendancy. But you can't change that by telling people what they're doing is wrong. You change things by offering people a vision of a future. They go, yeah, that looks good. How do we do that? And by offering them, okay, here's how you do this. So in essence, that's what the book, that's when I came down off the hill and I had the first scene and then the 3 other scenes and the idea that that's what I needed to do. So that's as clean cut as I can get. Do you want me to talk about the first scene and the 3 others? Because that's more of the mythical part.
Yeah, we'd love to hear about that.
So the first scene, Lan, who we've already established is quite like me, so she's early 60s and she's lying in a bed and her 15-year-old grandson is sitting at her side and he says, when you come home, can we go up the hill and watch the crows go to bed? Which is what I'd been doing. Part of the instruction that I got while I was sitting was to set up a particular place to sit on the hill in a particular way and sit there for at least an hour as the sun goes down every night until further notice. And by the end of the week, I had the book, and then the instruction was, now you write the book, and if you want to come up the hill, you're welcome, but you don't have to. But when I started, I had no idea that a book was coming. I thought I was doing homeopathy exams. I thought I was going to be a homeopath, and I thought I'm going to be sitting up the hill for the rest of my life, maybe. However, watching the crows go to bed was a lovely thing. It was August. It was beautiful. August in our country is midsummer, so it was lovely. And so Finn says, can we watch the crows go to bed? He actually means, can we go home and play World of Warcraft, which is their kind of little secret together. He lives with them. He lives with Lan now. Her partner Kate has died 6 months previous to this, but his mother is in Scotland. He, for reasons explained in the book, escapes from a not very good situation, comes down, lives with his mad grandmothers because it's better than living in Glasgow. He's mixed race and it's not going down very well. And so they play World of Warcraft together. However, she says, I'm not coming home. We have talked about this. I'm dying. You know this. We've had this conversation. There is no coming home from here. And in the ensuing conversation, he says, you're the only one who gets me. I don't want to live in a world with you not in it. And she realizes he's serious. And she says, I don't know what comes next. In spite of the fact that she spent 40 years as an anthropologist explicitly studying death and beliefs around death from indigenous cultures all around the world, she's realizing as she's dying that she doesn't actually know. However, if you, Finn, call, if you really need me, I will do whatever I can to come to you. I promise. And he and she and we all feel the gods pause in their labels and look down and go, okay, that's a promise. You are held to that. And then she dies. And the whole of the rest of the book is told from her perspective, caught in the between place between the lands of life and the lands of death, because she can't progress on because she's held by this promise. And so that was a given. That's your starting point. Go from there. And then the other thing that I had was 3 scenes that are iterations of each other. And Lan, quite soon after she dies, is taken by her guide, which is a crow, into a place that is I am familiar with within the shamanic work that I do, which is called the Void. It's a place outside space and time, and it is not a place that you go voluntarily or without a lot of guidance and a lot of help and without seriously knowing what you're doing. The only other person Lan knows who's ever gone there is an indigenous person who is much, 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 much more anchored in shamanic realities than her, and he went there and he vanished. And the crow has already explained that this is not, if you screw up here, it's not like dying, it's just, transition to another way of being. This is annihilation for both of us, you, Lan, and me, the crow. So please don't screw up. Here are the rules. And she gets in, and the crow shows her how to anchor, how to hone her intent so cleanly that she's able to split the timelines and see all the various ways that Finn does succeed in killing himself in different timelines. However, the implication, if you're able to do that, is that if you can take agency, and that's not a guaranteed thing, you may be able to create a different future that doesn't exist yet because you haven't taken the agency to make it happen. And then she's kicked back into consensus reality, the lands of the living, where she has no corporeal existence, with the instruction, okay, see what you can do. You don't want him to die? Up to you now. And then twice more. She goes in once for the insurgent movement that's growing around the family after the tweet that you mentioned. And then again for the whole of humanity. If we are all locked in a bus that's barreling towards the edge of a cliff, she sees all the ways we could crash and burn and the horror of it. But again, the implication in both of these is that if she can take agency, and by now we're 15 years further on, the original scene is 2008, and then we jump quite quickly to 2023, then if she can take agency, she may be able to help the movement around the family to create a different future, which then takes us to the Thrutopian idea of, okay, so they're doing this. What does it look like in real time on the ground when you're anchored in a different value set? Because we need a different value set. If we're still in the see, want, take of predatory capitalism, we're not getting anywhere. We have to start from a different set of values. It has to be peaceful because those values would incorporate us being a lot more adult than we are, frankly, and connected to the web of life. And then the ideas of power over simply vanish. And then what do you do? What can you do within the existing system to change it to something different? And we follow them through as they're doing that. Did that make sense? Did it feel like
It did. It did. I'd like to ask you, Manda, to explain Thrutopia, because the first time I I kind of heard that term, it was a little bit of a mind bend for me to really understand what that meant. So for our listeners who may not have heard that term before, can you explain what that means?
Yes, and it's not surprising they hadn't heard it, because again, I am endeavouring to create a new genre. I borrowed the term with his permission, I always say that, from Professor Rupert Reed, who wrote a paper in 2017 in Huffington Post where he posited the need for Thrutopias. He and I have a slightly different view of what a Thrutopia is, but so I'm going to give you mine. So the core is, up until now, we've had a lot of dystopias, and dystopias are, all the worst of humanity is let loose, and we end up with something that's a hybrid between Handmaid's Tale and The Road, and we're all being tortured to death by our bigger and nastier neighbours who are then going to eat us. It's horrible. It's really unpleasant. And anyone who works with energy knows that where you put your energy and your imagination and your intent, even if it's fearful intent, is where you get to. So it's not useful from that point of view. It's also incredibly lazy. It doesn't take any imagination to work it out. And a lot of very well-meaning people are making dystopic novels or dystopic films. And every single one thinks, we will make the one where everybody will go, oh my God, it really is going to be that bad. We will change tomorrow. And for my dissertation at Schumacher, I wrote on the neurophysiology of language. It was called Whispering to the Amygdala, the role of language, frame, and metaphor in the process of transition. Because when I was a vet, I was really interested in neurophys, and then I really wanted to understand how language works. And the point is that there is no chance ever that a dystopia will do what the people writing it think it will do, because that's not how human neurophysiology works. If you don't give people a vision of a future that feels better, it doesn't need to feel easy. It can be, climbing Everest is incredibly hard, but people have a vision of standing at the top, and that's a good thing. Quite often in political movements, Nazi Germany is a horrible one to use, but it's very interesting because there's no point where they were saying to people this is going to be easy. They were saying it's going to be really, really hard, blood, sweat, and tears. But the end result is that you, people who have been shamed for several generations, will feel pride, and our entire culture will be proud to be who we are. And the fact that we believe they were completely wrong doesn't mean that that wasn't an incredibly enticing offer. So it's going to be hard, it's fine. But look, the future is better. You have to give people a vision and show them how you're going to get there. So dystopias don't work, never going to work. Please, anybody listening who's a writer, please stop with the dystopias. They're a really, really bad idea. And I'm quite happy sitting here saying it's incredibly lazy. Don't do it. Utopias are slightly better because they're an attempt to envision a better future, but there's always a jump cut, or they're on a different planet with a different species often, or humanity has got there and it's 1,000 years in the distance, or there's been a virus or a nuclear war or something, and the survivors are good people and they're making good stuff happen. You can't see how to get there. So the Thrutopia, and Rupert spelt it THRU, topia, so we're going with that, is how do we get through from exactly a recognizable present towards something that we would be proud to leave to the generations that come after us. I've been doing a bunch of book festivals all summer, and I started off in ones like the Great Green Gathering and Nature Culture Connection Network, which, as you can imagine, are quite right on and sorted. But I ended up at actual standard literary festivals, and I check everybody's okay with this, and then I walk them through a guided visualization where we go back through the generations, 300,000 years of human evolution, back through 5 previous mass extinctions, back to the point where we're hydrogen molecules are whoever came before us. There was a point where we were all hydrogen molecules boiling in the sun, back to the Big Bang. Sit there for a moment. What does it feel like? Come all the way forward. And then when you get back to the present moment, turn around, step 7 generations into our descendant line. Blood descendants or spirit descendants, and ask them, did we do okay? Look them in the eye and ask. And what can you teach us? Because every morning when I do my morning ceremony, I look at the generations who have been before and the generations yet to come, and I ask that the wisdom of both inform the present. Because, how did we get to where you are? And is where you are a good place? Are you proud of us? Is a really core question. And people have found it profoundly moving. And I do it regularly. And it's, how do you live your life such that you can look them in the eye and go, we did our best? And I don't think what we're doing collectively as a human race is doing our best just now. But that's, again, because we haven't got the visions of what doing our best might look like.
Yeah, so I would imagine that would be quite a challenging thing to do too, like to face your future generations, as you said, your descendants.
Quite a lot of people come back with very wet faces, yes.
Yeah. I just, even when you were asking that question there, just thinking about that, and I thought, ooh, like I really felt that in my body. It was like, no, they're not happy. Yeah, that's powerful.
If you have it as a daily practice, I guarantee you it'll change the way that you perceive your life. I think there are a few other daily practices that are useful also, but that one's a really useful one.
That kind of links back to you teaching conscious evolution and your shamanic practices, which you call dreaming. Can you tell us a bit more about that, especially people who don't understand it or know anything about it, and what it means to you?
Wow. Okay, normally that takes me a weekend, and that's the foundation weekend.
That's the paid course.
yeah, that's the one-to-one. And actually, to be fair, with the dreaming, my senior apprentice now teaches the first 5 years because I'm not getting any younger, and I needed someone who was going to had more stamina. Okay, so let's look a little bit at initiation culture and trauma culture, because I think this is a useful frame. It's only one that I've come to understand in the last year. But it was posited by Francis Weller, who's a trauma therapist in the US, who was taught by Patrice Malidoma Somé, who wrote a book called Of Water and the Spirit. And he was African. He was kidnapped by Jesuits, basically as a sex toy, as far as I can tell, when he was very young. And he managed to escape when he was 16, 17 and crossed the whole of Africa and get back to his people. And he was allowed to undertake their adolescent rite of passage. And he writes of it very movingly because he came then, he'd been inculcated with Western, what we would now call trauma mindset, and he's gone back to the initiation mindset. And how does he connect to the rest of the web of life when he has no clue? But he was born into it. So he had kind of the epigenetics there. It's a very moving book. And then he discovered that his name means something like bridge between the worlds. And he was given that name before he was ever born, when he was, in utero, by the tribal shaman. So he has become a bridge between the worlds because he speaks both languages, both sets of conceptual languages, not just actual languages. And he taught Francis Weller. So Weller has come up with this concept of initiation versus trauma. So initiation cultures are all of the indigenous cultures and all of human history back 300,000 years or longer. Every time somebody does some work, we think humanity is a little bit older than we think it is. And it's in that concept of a culture, we are utterly connected to the web of life. We know ourselves to be a node within of consciousness within the web of life. And these cultures are characterized by the individuals within them undergoing intermittent, episodic, contained encounters with death. And the containment is held by the elders, by the whole of the tribe, and by the land, the more than human world, everything else that is alive. And that's when a rock is alive, a tree is alive, a mountain is alive, the earth is alive, the stars are alive. You're part of this web of consciousness. And the individual is pushed to the edges themselves. It's an encounter with death where death is a real possibility, such that they have to ask for help. And particularly they're asking for help with the web of life, although also of the elders and the people. And if they can ask and receive that help, bring it in and act on it, then they come back alive to the people and they're changed. They are more aware of their own sense of meaning and purpose, of being, belonging, becoming. And they're characterized, this then becomes, they're part of a serotonin culture. If we posit that there are two broad encouragement circuits within our brains, reward circuits. And this is really basic neurophys, I am aware of this, but serotonin cultures are, and the circuits are characterized by pride and respect. I have pride in knowing that I am doing what is mine to do, and I'm doing it as well as I possibly can. And I am surrounded by people that I respect absolutely, where I have that sense of reciprocity and relationship and respect. And I am proud of them and they are proud of me. And pride and respect trigger the serotonin. And it's a mesh. It's a very widespread circuit within our brains, and it's additive, it's cumulative, and it's extensive. Trauma cultures don't have any of that. We don't have the knowing that we are an integral part of the web of life in our marrow, such that when we hit the edges of ourselves and we're in real trauma, we can ask for help. We don't know how to do that. We don't have the elders who can teach us. We don't have the tribe of the human and the more than human world that is there to support us. And so our traumas are not contained. They're just stack and stack and stack and stack and stack until they overflow. And we end up with a culture which has extraordinary pandemics of mental health issues because we don't have a sense of meaning and purpose, of being, belonging, becoming, of knowing that whatever happens, we are part of a bigger picture that is there to help us, and knowing that death is a rite of passage itself. It's not an end point. We don't have to be afraid of it. We just walk through it with grace and gratitude into whatever comes next. And our culture is a dopamine culture. And dopamine reward circuits are characterized by little short hits that are not cumulative. They're all isolated. And they are subject to the laws of diminishing returns. So if I had a nose full of cocaine or alcohol or sugar or white carbs or music or coffee or porn or likes on the internet, or Jonathan Haidt did some really interesting work where if my team, my side, my tribe has been losing in the binary battles that our culture sets up, whatever they are, and then it looks like it's leaping ahead and getting one over the other side, that is going to create a dopamine hit as big as if I'd had a nose full of cocaine.
Wow.
Which is one of the
It's
reasons
phenomenal,
why
isn't it?
tribal politics is so addictive. And all of these are keeping me in isolation. I don't ask for help from the web of life. I just want another dopamine hit. I want my tribe to win again. Or, I want another drink, or I want some more cocaine, or I want some porn, or whatever it is. And they don't connect me to anything. And there's no pride and respect in that. In fact, underneath it all is probably guilt and shame, which are not useful. But there are other parts of us going, no, don't do that. Because we're born into a world where we arrive as little neonates expecting that serotonin mesh. We expect to be cherished within a tribe where the whole of the tribe is raising us and raising us knowing our place in the web of life, knowing that if we ask, the help is there. We just need to learn how to receive it. So shamanic work. And nobody in the West can ever be a shaman. I reject that utterly. If you don't grow in an indigenous culture, you cannot be a shaman. But you can use the tools of shamanic practice. My spiritual path is shamanic because I use the tools to help me connect to the gods of this land. I'm on the island of Britain, and the gods of this land are alive and well. And I just need to learn how to connect with them and ask them for help. And that's the key, is that the way that I teach the students is the concept is that this reality, the one in which we're speaking, 3 dimensions and time, is a tiny, 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 tiny fraction of all possible realities. And with training, using the tools of shamanic practice, it is possible for an individual to step out of this reality into the infinite potential of all the other realities in order to ask for help, and then bring that help back and integrate it, because the point is that we are the conscious nodes in the web of life, and we're doing stuff that is going to enhance the web of life. If we're not asking for help, we're just spacing out, that's not shamanic practice. We need to know how to move out of this reality, where to go, how to meet with things that are here for our best and highest good, because not everything is, how to ask appropriate questions, what those appropriate questions might be, how to hear the answers, how to bring them back, and how to implement them. And if we're missing any step on that way, then we're not doing the work. And the course that I teach is theoretically 10 years, but nobody's done it in less than 16 just because life gets in the way. And we know from Herodotus that when people were coming from all over what was then the known world, so known by Herodotus, which is basically Europe and bits of India and Asia, were coming to the island called Mona, which we now call Anglesey, which is off the west coast of Wales. It was a druidic training centre, and people would come for between 12 and 20 years to learn, and then they'd go back to their people with that learning. And I was offered a training by a Huichol medicine healer in the 90s. And it was going to be between 12 and 20 years. And if you're still alive at the end of it, then you passed, but the pass rate is not very high. And in the end, I would have had to move to central Mexico, and I didn't do it. I did other stuff instead. But it still takes a long, long time, particularly in our Western cultures, for us to let go of the parts of us that think they already have the answers, or that they have to make the answers happen, and get to the trusting in our heart space that says, I can connect, and the answers are there. So shamanic practice is learning that.
So it's sort of like shedding that arrogance, isn't it? Of that we have, like you said, we have all the answers, or we can come up with the answers, and within ourselves, as opposed to, even from that, taking it to that everyday level as well, of being able to connect with those others. It's coming back to that people care.
Yes, exactly. And I think blaming ourselves, we could, but it's what our culture does. And the thing about the trauma culture is that trauma probably happened. I think it has to have happened before we undertook Western agriculture, which is 10 to 12,000 years ago. We've had many, many, many generations of being separate and telling ourselves we're separate, and acting as if it's okay to put a fence or a hedge or a wall around a bit of land, and then whatever happens inside that boundary is mine. And I can take animals, I can take wild buffalo, and I can go through however many generations it takes to domesticate them enough that I can tie them to a plow and beat them all day, and they'll walk in a straight line, which is not wild buffalo. And and that this is okay because I am separate and I own them and ownership is a thing. Because it's not an Indigenous. We know Australia, where you are, it was a managed landscape. It just wasn't cut into fields. And it was managed with the land, with the dreaming of the land. It wasn't imposed upon it. So we've got 12,000 years of trauma. Those of us who, that lineage goes back that far. Or in the UK, I think it's only 2,000 years, but that's still 100 generations. How do we heal that within ourselves, between ourselves and the rest of the web of life? So that's what the conscious evolution is also aimed at. I had another set of visions. We don't need to go into detail, but just Winter Solstice 2018, where I needed to start teaching at scale. That was the message once I understood it. And because the Dreaming Awake is small group teaching, it's 15 max usually, because we need to really connect with each individual person and make sure they're okay, because this isn't the safest thing. It's, a lot of people, when I was told if you're still alive at the end of it, you passed and the pass rate isn't high, they weren't joking. And in shamanic cultures, people will die rather than become the shaman, and people will die in the process of becoming the shaman. It's not fluffy. And there's kind of Western, what I call Disney shamanism, where I make my reality and everything's beautiful and there is nothing bad exists in the world. You think, did you look at a newspaper recently?
Yeah, have you stepped outside?
There are extremely bad things in the world.
Very much so.
And if once you step out of the safe confines of this reality, there's things out there that really don't like people, and I don't necessarily blame them. And you need to have the capacity to know when you're safe and when you're not, and not be sitting there going, "Oh, it's okay, I love dragons; they're fine." Oh, and now I'm a crispy lunch of a dragon. Oh dear. And that's making fun. But I've watched people lose their minds, and I've watched people die. Or I haven't sat and watched them die, but there are people I know who made really, really, I would suggest, egregious, arrogant mistakes who are now dead. And of course, people die all the time. Who knows? That might be nothing to do with what they were doing shamanically, but it equally might. And so in the way I teach, we're very, very, very focused on safety and on actually understanding where our own boundaries are. However, if I'm going to teach at scale, what could I teach safely? And what came was there's that we need to undergo conscious evolution, which is to say the evolution of our consciousness, consciously chosen. And that this isn't going to be little iterations of DNA. I've got slightly longer legs because the antelope are running slightly faster, and then they run faster again and I get more long legs. This is in real time, in ourselves, in a generation. How do we get to the point where we're actually functioning as the best we can be, so that we can look 7 generations down the line and go, did we do okay? And they can look back and go, yes, we're proud of you. So how do we do that? And that I can teach in a wider context, because I'm not taking people outside safe spaces, but I'm still endeavoring to offer things that will help them to connect to the web of life. Because then you ask the web of life, what do you need me to do? And you respond to the answers in real time. And then you're part of the complexity of life. Instead of human minds, our brains are very good at complicated, linear thinking. They're not good at complex, non-linear thinking. This is why people we have the solution, and it's, I don't know, go vegan, or have an electric car, or cut down all the forests and put solar panels. And no, please, no. There's a lot of other stuff, and it's all we can do is take ourselves to the emergent edge of interbecoming. That's a lovely man called Indy Johar has that sense of interbecoming, and be at the emergent edge in the hope that we are creating the space for emergence to happen. And that's based on a physicist called Ilya Prigogine, got the Nobel Prize for understanding that when any system reaches maximal complexity, it has 2 possible paths. And one is that it crashes into chaos and extinction, ceases to exist or ceases to be that system. And the other is that it emerges into a new system. And the point of the new system is that it's not predictable at all from the old system. If you can predict where you're going, it's not a new system. You've just painted the wheels on the bus a different color.
Yeah.
So butterfly from caterpillar is emergence into a new system. And if you didn't know Earth biology, you wouldn't predict the butterfly. So we can't predict where we're going, but we can get ourselves to the emergent edge, where the possibility of emergence into a new, more flourishing, more connected, more thriving system is possible. And that's what Accidental Gods teaching is trying to do.
And I suppose with that then, Manda, how do we do that, in our everyday lives, and we do that on scale? So, there's obviously, you're saying you're teaching this through your course, and there would be others out there doing the same thing as well. But if we're speaking to the masses, speaking to the everyday, mums and dads, and they've got jobs, they've got bills to pay, they're trying to create a life and do the best that they can with what they have and what they know. What advice can you give for them to, I suppose, step into that space and start to explore that world for themselves?
It depends on where they are. I've set up Accidental Gods. My absolute baseline was a single mother with 3 kids under the age of 10 who lives in a tower block in the middle of a city. And here's, put your earphones on, play this 10-minute, 20-minute visualization, and then tomorrow do the next one, and then the next one, and then the next one. And that's one route. However, clearly not everyone's going to do that. Partly people don't have 20 minutes. And one of the problems is I think we need to make time. So I would say there are 3 ways of looking at this. One is I don't think we'll get to where we need to go if we don't do the inner work to heal our own traumas. We know that trauma stops time. And parts of us are stopped in time 12,000 years ago. And other parts are stopped in time, when we were 2 years old or whatever. We need to thaw those parts. We need to heal such that the creativity of those returns to our core self, and we can really live fully instead of living bouncing between the frozen parts. And that takes time, and it takes the willingness to go inside. And as you said, people have jobs and mortgages to pay and families to raise, and they don't necessarily have time. I think those who do have time, that's urgent work. Doing the inner work is urgent. I tend to frame this on Joanna Macy's 3 pillars of the Great Turning. There's holding actions, systems change, and shifting consciousness. And so for those who are drawn to shifting consciousness, it starts inside. And then it gets to the point where we recognize that we have a choice in any moment of living from gratitude and compassion and joyful curiosity of, wow, this is amazing. I am totally in love with living, and I have no idea what happens next, but in that I'm capable of being fully present in the moment, fully heart open. My head mind has dialed itself down to the point where I live from my heart mind, and then I'm connected to the web of life, and I can move from there. Or I can live in despair and despondency and depression and rage and terror and all of those things, feeding out that energy to whatever it is that's lodged in the human psyche that feeds on those things, because clearly there is something that feeds on those things. And when we know that's a choice, it doesn't mean I don't feel grief. I did a podcast recently with Douglas Rushkoff, who said really beautifully that if you scratch the surface of anyone, there is an ocean of grief underneath, and he's completely right. However, I don't have to I can acknowledge the grief. I can know it's there. I can honor it, because what we love is what we grieve. If we don't love something, we don't grieve. If we do love things, we're going to grieve what's happening in the world. But I don't have to live from that grief. I live from the gratitude and the compassion and the joyful curiosity. So for the people who want to work with shifting consciousness, do that work. There are some people who really that's not their calling, and they don't know how, and they don't have the tools, and working with your own stuff is hard and messy and quite frightening at times, and they just don't want to. In which case, I think there's holding actions. And holding actions can be, the current political system is completely not fit for purpose, yes, but we can make it the best it can be. We can put up new candidates. We can talk to people. We can change that. We can begin to evolve better economic systems. We can talk to people about why the death cult of predatory capitalism is a death cult. It knows that it's destroying that on which it lives, and it's doing it anyway because the people at the top get a little bit more powerful a little bit longer. Let's hold that conversation. So you can educate yourself on whatever brings you most alive, and talk to people about it, and join with other people in ways that change the current system. And part of writing the book was to offer the 3 paths. There's a lot of political change in the book because it's possible and it's necessary. So, and you don't have to be doing the spiritual work, the dreaming work, the connecting work If that's not your thing, you can still do that. But you're doing it. The key is to be building connections with other people. And the wonder of our world is they don't have to just be people in your place. It used to be that communities were communities of place because that was the people that you knew. And now we can have communities of passion and a purpose. I am talking to you across the other side of the world in real time.
Mhm.
It's astonishing. So you can connect with people and you can build the visions of a future that actually works and then work out how you get there. And that then moving us towards the systemic change. And systemic change understands that complex systems are complex. They're not predictable, but and therefore there's no single answer. Cutting down the forest to put up the solar panels is not an answer. It may make you feel a little bit better because you think you've done something useful, but it's not actually an answer until you look at the whole system and work out on a systemic basis what you can do. So systems change, again, doesn't have to be connected to the web of life and to your inner work, but it's a more intelligent way of approaching things than that linear, okay, I have an answer and it's this one thing. That'll make everything better. So pick whichever of those really speaks to you. There's a lovely quote that I heard a long time ago, and I don't know who it's from, which is find where your heart's greatest joy meets the world's greatest need. That, then do that, and be aware that that might change. But find that place and work from it and find other people who are then in that little Venn diagram intersection. Their greatest joy, world's greatest need is similar to yours. Work with them.
You mentioned permaculture in the book, and I feel like you were trying to spread that word of being more conscious of other people and, the people care and earth care, fair share, and these all tie into what, you're talking about, what the book's about. How did you first come across permaculture?
The honest answer is I don't remember exactly how I first came across it. I'm guessing I was reading Permaculture magazine when it first came out in the 90s because that was the kind of thing I was reading. And then I did go on a course, one of the early courses with Patrick Whitfield. I think it was 2006 because I just moved house. And that was amazing. That was so exciting and inspiring. And I didn't really get to put it into practice until we moved over the hill. And now we've got a little bit more space, and we screwed up. We put the polytunnel way too far away. But still, yeah, we're looking at, and there's a point where permaculture merges into regenerative agriculture.
Totally.
And we're kind of trying to edge into that space and see how we can build soils and sequester more water and increase biodiversity below land and above land and all of those things, knowing that we're part of a complex system and it's not the answer, but it's at least, if we can be an exemplar, we're surrounded by very old school farmers who, you can't teach farmers how to farm. So, but and they get terribly upset because we've got fields full of thistles, and they're looking over the fence going, "Thistles, you're spreading thistles." Going, no, guys, each thistle plant has 400,000 seeds. Yes, it's if your land is wanting thistles, thistles will arrive. If it's not, then they won't. So chill. But yeah, it's an interesting experience, and I'm still not sure where it goes, but it's fun to explore.
So I think a lot of the ethics side of permaculture is something that I'm still learning a lot about. And when I was reading your book, I found myself really challenged by some of the political things because I am not a political person. It's something that I'm trying to learn to love a bit more and to want to learn more about. I think I'm in that headspace where I feel really disillusioned by it all still. I'm like, it's all just messed up. There's nothing we can do. And so it was really eye-opening when I was listening to it because, like you said, it provides that way forward, and it made me want to become more invested in our political landscape here in Australia and learn more about it. And because I'm not at all. My husband is. Yes. He's very invested, and it was just so interesting seeing that path unfold in the book and the journey that the characters all go in. And can you talk more about that and how you see politics changing to play a part in this future and Thrutopia that we can kind of see ourselves in the future?
Yes. Thank you. Well, I'm really glad that it switched on some lights. That's perfect. That's what we want. So the first thing to say is that everything in the book, that side of the book, exists somewhere in the world. So a lot of the politics I took wholesale from what Audrey Tang did in Taiwan. Audrey Tang was the digital minister of Taiwan, who is a total genius on this and has been doing it a long time. She helped to what they call fork the government back in 2014. And they went from the Taiwanese government having 20% approval to now it's got 80% approval. And most democracies around the world would give their eye teeth for that level of approval because they engaged the people, because she understood that if you give trust, you get trust. And she's also a digital genius, and she worked out ways to create, for instance, social media that don't amplify the tribalism at the margins, but give people social media kudos for building bridges across divides. And how do you bring people into Zoom rooms where you know that they're all different political leaning, but you encourage them to talk to each other and you give them sets of problems of what matters to you. Tell us what's the 5 most important things to the 10 of you in the room and what your solutions would be. And here are other problems that other people have said are important. What would your solutions to these be? And then feed them back to us. And you can see us working through these and applying them in real time. So if we get to the basis, politics is our politics is wholly broken. We have the best democracy money can buy, which is very bad. This is a kleptocracy. It's not a democracy. All of the studies in all of the Western style nations that have what we call democracy have absolutely demonstrated that the people with the most money define what's happening, and the people with no money, which is you and me, define nothing. Voting is a sham. So it's completely and wholly broken. And then there are 2 options. Technically, we have governance by consent. If we all decided to be governed in a different way, the people in, for us, Westminster, I guess, don't know, Canberra for you? I can't remember where your parliament is, but, would become irrelevant. They'd be sitting in us, this old building, shouting at each other like, 5-year-olds, and we'd be ignoring them completely because we're governed in a different way. That's what forking the government broadly gets us to. However, I wanted, that's an option. The book ends on the night after a general election, and I'm working slowly towards the next one to see where that goes, because there's an option then both to have the alternative forked government and to work within the existing system, because we need ways to create governance. Every indigenous culture around the planet, and some of them are highly complex. There's a wonderful book called The Dawn of Everything by David Graeber and David Wengrow, and it blew my head wide open with the understanding of the extent to which there was highly, highly complex governance systems, but they were designed, they used social technologies to absolutely make sure that nobody gained power, that power was always a distributed thing. It's only in our trauma culture that we've created this system where the psychopaths get to the top and stay there, and then make sure other psychopaths get there too. And that's not a good option. But we still need to sort out how, even in a group of 150 people, the Dunbar number, you still need to sort out, who's making the decisions of how we build the houses and what we do with the sewage and where the water comes from. That has to happen. And so politics is essentially working out how that happens. And there are much, much better ways. Churchill said about 100 years ago that democracy is the worst system apart from all the other systems. And he was wrong even then. But he keeps being quoted. And he's 100% wrong now. And the great wonder of Audrey Tang, who's, since I wrote the book, left, she's no longer digital minister of Taiwan. She's touring the world, meeting up with pro-democracy groups and having a whale of a time discussing other options. And I had an email from her about 2 weeks after the book was published going, "Did you hack our brains? How did you get there?" It's like, "Oh, thank you. I'm so happy. First of all, you read my book, and second, you didn't think it was nonsense. Yay." So woohoo. And I didn't hack their brains. I just took what they'd already done and extrapolated it in what seemed to me obvious ways, because it's perfectly possible within the existing system to use the system to make it better. What you need is basic principles of trusting people, that creative people who live where they are, know what the problems are, and they have some really good ideas of how to fix them. Having ways of gathering that and helping people to talk to each other, because all of the work done is that even when there's extreme toxic tribalism, like particularly in the States at the moment, if you bring people together in an actual room and facilitate such that they feel heard and they're feeling seen. There's a lovely woman called Sarah Schlotter who does something called Equisoma, and she talks about feeling felt and getting gotten. And you need to have that sense of agency that my views matter, and people hear them. And if you do that, eventually you get to core values that everybody shares. Everybody wants the world to be better for their kids. Everybody wants integrity, accountability, agency, compassion, courage to be at the core of what they're doing. Where we end up in these fractured, fragmented, toxic tribes is arguing about how we get there, but often we're arguing within a relatively narrow band of what's possible. And so what I also think is really important as we get to grips with our politics is expanding what's possible. Because we're told there is no alternative to capitalism, for instance, and that this kind of democracy maintains capitalism, and it does maintain capitalism, but there are massively better options than capitalism. We just need to find out how to implement them. We just need to agree what the value system is, back to the beginning, and then what do they look like? What do they feel like? How do we get there? And we get there by giving people agency. And the great thing about living in the 21st century with our technology is we can gather data. In Taiwan, they had groups of 10. They have a 10 million population. So they had 1 million groups of 10, which you can do on the internet. And they were gathering input and advice and concepts from these groups. And you could do that. You can iterate that infinitely around the world. It's not a problem. But you need to give people the emotional literacy to get past the screaming sound bites at each other and get to, where am I? And I was talking yesterday to Judith Schwartz. You might want to talk to her. She's written a book. She's written many, but the most recent is called The Reindeer Chronicles. And it's wonderful. And part of it's in Australia. It's lovely. Read it.
Oh, okay.
And she's talking about someone who goes around the world, but this particular instance, they're in the US, and there are the ranchers and the people who control the water supply. This is in New Mexico, and they hate each other, and guns are being fired. Nobody's been shot yet, but it's going to happen. And they spend a lot of time bringing these people together into the room. And they ask the question, what's the worst that could happen? What's the best that could happen? And allowing people to speak their fears and allowing them to imagine how things could be. And then they took the kind of opposing two leaders, sat them down, and had two other people reflecting back what they'd said, and everybody else sitting around. So they got to say, and they got to hear that they'd been heard. And by the end of it, they'd reached a place where they could see a way forward together. And we just need so much more of that. So that we're not in these ridiculous tribes. There are no tribes on a dead planet. And we are heading to a dead planet. I know frightening people with more data points is not useful, but we are heading to the sixth mass extinction. And if 5% of all life survives, it's not going to be the pink hairless bipedal, former apes. It's just not. So we need to find ways of collaborating. We need to find ways to have compassion for each other, to give each other agency, to find accountability in our governance systems, because that's, in the book we had 3 suggestions which brought down the government because nobody in the current government wanted them, but they were random drink and drugs tests in all houses of parliament at 3 strikes and you're out. And that's so obvious. Why is that not happening?
Yeah.
If you're a surgeon or you're flying a plane, you turn up drunk, you lose your job. You are organizing the country and you're drunk, and that doesn't seem to matter. And Rory Stewart, who was, he says, if you go into, he's an ex-MP, says you go into the House of Commons and you sit down with somebody in the cafe and you try to talk policy, everybody around you will bray that horrible laughter until you shut up, because they're not interested. They just want to talk about gossip and who's knifed who and who hasn't. They're not interested in policy. We don't need these people are not fit to be running anything. And drink and drugs tests would get rid of a lot of them. So random drink and drugs test, absolute transparency of spending, put all the spending on the blockchain so that it cannot be retroactively changed, and we see where you spend every single penny. And if a company wants to get government money, then it has to put all of its accounts on the blockchain too. And guess what? There's a lot of companies don't suddenly want government money then. But they're not going to be getting, I don't know what it was like with you in lockdown, but there are companies over here that were given more money than any civil contractor had ever been given in the history of British governance, in order to cut up black bin bags and sell them back to the NHS as if they were PPE. And these people just ran with the money. It was absolute public larceny, and it should never have happened. And if they'd had to account for every single penny, they wouldn't even have signed the original contract. And then the third one was changing the voting franchise so that
Age.
younger people get to vote. And I had originally a cutoff at 85. I still stand by that. It really upsets. I'm amazed the number of people in their 80s going, "You're going to take away my vote." I'm going, "What do you think your vote is actually worth? Tell me. Do you actually
Really?
think you make a difference? And would you not
Yeah.
like to be doing something more useful?" But there was a thing where if you really wanted to vote, you get someone in the younger bracket, 10 to 15, together with somebody in that older bracket, and they have to have 3 separate hours in a Zoom room with facilitators, so abuse is not happening, in order to listen to each other. And if at the end of it they could say they listened, you don't have to agree, but I was heard, and both of you say, "Yes, I was heard," then you both get to vote. If one or other of you goes, "Nope, I wasn't heard," then neither of you gets to vote. And we could do that too.
That's just beautiful accountability. Yeah.
Quadratic voting. I wanted the Australian system of voting is compulsory. Forget this. We're trying to disenfranchise people. No, I'm sorry, you have to vote. But I would have a none of the above option. So if you cross the box that says none of the above, and that wins in that constituency, then you rehold the vote and nobody who is on that ballot is allowed to sit again. And that stops what we have over here, which is our party parachutes in their favourite advisor
candidate.
to be the candidate, and nobody wants them. So you just all go, "No, none of the above, sorry." Until they stop doing that, and you have the person you'd actually like to represent you. And you have power of recall.
We just had local elections last weekend, actually, throughout the state. So it was really interesting because it's just a popularity contest. Like it's who do you know who's been in the gig for that long, and it's it's certainly not the right person. And on that too, there is no information, there is no communication about these people, what they stand for, what have they achieved, what are they planning on achieving. Goodness gracious, if we actually knew what was happening. There is zero information about that. Is if they choose to put that out there themselves, then great, but if not, there is no way of finding that information. So there's no accountability.
Our local election, I got really emotional actually because the lady I voted for got in. And she's a hippie homeschooler who decided to run and buck the trend. And she ran her election very differently. So instead of being like, "This is what I want, this is what I want to do," she actually started campaigning by telling people about herself. So I'm a 5th generation. I've lived here for this long. I homeschool my kids. And she kind of went through the election cycle telling people about her and her values. And then kind of went on to the next stage of, what she wanted the community to look like and feel like and all these kinds of things. And she got in.
Fantastic.
Brilliant. So as the mayor or as a councillor?
As a councillor.
As a councillor, yep.
And she's very environmentally focused. She's worn the exact same red dress to every single event. So she's never she's not buying a new wardrobe for everything. And I'm just so excited to see where it all heads because it's really cool for a small area that's very farmers, shooters, fishers, that kind of mindset, to have someone like her running and then actually become a councillor.
Yes. Fantastic. And then to be an exemplar for other people, to be a model so that can replicate. And once you get that beginning, I think it can move very fast. So yay.
That's amazing. That's amazing.
Yeah, very cool. Well, we're just coming up on an hour now. I'd love to keep talking to you for so much longer because there's so many questions we didn't even touch on. But if somebody was starting out on this journey, what piece of advice would you give them?
Find where your heart's greatest joy meets the world's greatest need and give everything to that. So I think step outside as much as possible. Step outside of the death cult of predatory capitalism. Understand that it's dying, it's over, and we can lay the foundations for something new. We won't know what the new looks like, but we can, like you said with that lady who was elected, she told you what her values were. Find what your values are and share them. Build communities of place, purpose, and passion. And we all still have to survive. We still have to eat. We still have to have a roof over our heads. We still have to have clean water and hopefully clean air. But within that, find the people who care about what you care about and ask them what they need and work out what needs to happen and make it happen, and just step off the train of predatory capitalism and talk to people. Talk to your family. Talk to the people you meet in the queue at the supermarket. Talk to people where you'd normally just talk about, I don't know what you talk about in Australia, we talk about the weather. Don't talk about the weather. Talk about, my goodness, there's no insects this year. Isn't that interesting? What could we do to bring back the insects? What's your idea? Listen to people. What's your idea?
I think an amazing place to start too is your website, because I realized once we finished the book that there's all these resources that you provide. So I think if anybody's interested in anything we've spoken about or anything that touches anywhere near this, then to jump on what you've got offered on your website, because there's so many resources and groups to connect with and things that you share, and it's amazing. So thank you for doing that.
Thank you. Thank you. We didn't put it at the end of the book because that does become obsolete very quickly. And so we have the resources for the book are on a page on the website because I can update it. So yeah, thank you.
Fantastic. We'll make sure that we pop all the links to your website and how to be able to access your book, whether that's reading the physical copy or Audible. Listening to Audible was just
she's cracking, isn't she?
Oh, just such a great voice, and it really does take you through the story, because there's books that you listen to and you're listening to the content and it's good. But then there's books that you get lost in. Like I call them, I miss my turn off books. Like they're the ones that I've got on in the car. And I'm like, I'm ways away of where I should be because I am just in the moment. And your book, listening to that was absolutely that for me.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Manda, for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. It's been a delight. Really good questions. Really interesting conversation. Thank you. I feel I overspoke. I'll need to learn.
No, not at all. Not at all.
No.
Like I said, we could have gone for hours listening to, listening to you and your explanation. Like it's just amazing. But we will let you get on with your beautiful Friday. And thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Practical Permaculture Podcast. Jump onto our Facebook group to keep the chat going and to look for any resources that we mentioned on today's show. Look in the show notes.
And if you liked the episode today, then subscribe. Please give us a review and share. And if you didn't, then that's okay. We'll sure you'll find the right podcast for you.
Bye.
Bye.